Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King, joined here today by Jason Caldwell and Christian Clemente. This is not Thursday Night Live because football season is over now and probably won't be in that exact schedule anymore, but still sponsored by AU Club. So thank you so much to them for sponsoring us, and go check them out if you guys haven't. Hopefully you heard us all throughout football season promoting them and talking about all the great stuff you can get over at AU Club, and we definitely appreciate them for sponsoring us as usual. Sorry, Christian, were you about to jump in?
I was just going to say, look, it's cold right now, but golf season is coming up. Golf season is around the corner, and AU Club is one of top 5 courses in the state of Alabama, in my opinion. I mean, it's up there.
Yep, I agree.
So definitely start taking a look over there.
I mean, it is warm today.
Well, it looks warm outside, and it's not as warm, but at least the sun's shining for the first time in a week, so that's a positive. So
I was going to say, yeah, it's a big difference. That's a big difference. My wife bought some solar lights for the front, like at Sam's, and had them set up to be like red and green for Christmas. I was all excited about it, and then it's been gray. Like they just haven't been turned on. Period. Yeah, I haven't had any light at all. So maybe today will be the day. We just wanted to kind of get together and do a bit of a catch-all podcast today. As you guys will be listening to this on Wednesday morning, it will be day 10 of the Alex Golesh era at Auburn. Lots has happened since he's been introduced. It kind of feels like the wheels are now in motion. The first few days of a new coach, it's seeing what you got going on, kind of honestly just getting to know the guy, everyone in the fan base coming to know who the coach is. And now, Jason, we've got a staff. I mean, there's a staff not fully in place, but both of your coordinators are now in place. We would expect even more moves to be made official on the coaching staff. Probably by the time you listen to this, there will only be like 3 assistant slots left. What was interesting to me was when we talked to Alex Golesh on Monday at his press conference, he said some guys he's talking to are still coaching. He mentioned the word playoff. So, like, I mean, I think we initially heard and reported that he wanted to get the staff done as fast as possible, and I think he got as much done as possible as he could, Jason, and now we're in the final stages where it's just a couple slots. I don't think he's necessarily rushing those, and especially because you have both your coordinators in place. That's such a big place to start.
Yeah, and literally as we're recording this, which is 1:00 on Wednesday or Tuesday, excuse me, I just got a text, and then it just got, I think just hit published from Matt Zenitz that Auburn is expected to hire Coleman Hutzler as defensive ends coach, former defense coordinator. So I honestly, I was just getting ready to text you guys going, hey, I just got a text about this, and then boom, it popped up. So I would assume that one would be moving pretty quickly, but Zenitz just put it out. So I would expect that once it starts to get that kind of momentum, I would expect that one to be done. Now, may not be officially done because we know Auburn, they wait till these things are done from a contract perspective until it's released. But there's another one I think we can safely add to the list is Coleman Hutzler, and that's a guy with a pretty strong background of coaching in this league. So another addition on the defensive side of the ball.
The beauty of live podcasting, that's a big hire. If I'm reading correctly, like you said, Jason, a lot of SEC experience for him. We can pull back the onion here a little bit on our workflow. Do you want me to work on a story for that, or are you working on it? What do you want me to do?
Yeah, I can do it while we're doing this because I can. I just put it.
I can talk signing day stuff with Nathan a little bit for a while, bounce back and forth, Jason, while you're working on that.
Notes up on the message boards and let people know. But yeah, we can work on that a little bit as we're going through this. But yeah, that's the nature of this job for sure.
All right, Jason has been excused from the classroom for a little bit. Yeah, we'll start there, Christian. Talking about signing day. I mean, it was. I thought the way Golesh put it yesterday, was pretty apt. It was kind of the best they could have done. Really, the only and you know so much more, and so correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, the only one is Jace Matthews. That's one that you maybe wanted to get, but obviously that's a really prickly situation for him too. Just having surgery a couple weeks ago, and I know he was going to cost a lot of money. Regardless, you wanted him in the class. He was committed to you. But it seems like, Christian, in terms of a transition class, pretty good job for this group. And Alex Golesh, sort of in that same vein, in that same conversation, talked about his philosophy when it comes to recruiting, which is, and he wasn't intending to do this. It's kind of not the opposite of Hugh Freeze, but it's very different. in terms of not putting all your eggs in the recruiting basket. He said, it's great to, recruit high-level players, but you don't want to win signing day. He said, winning football games is more important. And that kind of speaks broadly, as I'm sure you're going to, speaks broadly to his mindset and his process about what recruiting in the portal will look like at Auburn.
Yeah, it's not star chasing. That's kind of what it comes down to. Auburn signed I think it's the number 41 class in the country, only 18 signees. There were some fans that were certainly upset about some of the movement, some of the late, the 3-star flips, the guys coming over from USF and whatnot. Look, that's not going to be the regular under Alex Golesh, and he said that. This was it. They want to compete for top 10 classes at Auburn, but when you arrive on Sunday, get into Auburn on Sunday afternoon, and your signing day is on Wednesday, and you're inheriting a group of, I believe it was 12 commitments at the time, and you decide to trim some of those because you don't want to pay previous agreements, guys like Peyton Falzone and whatnot. Nico Heppy was a guy that Auburn didn't really want to keep in the class. This new staff, Braylon Womack flips out. That's a different circumstance. Auburn wanted to keep him. That was a true flip. When you trim it down from 12 to 9, and then you're rebuilding that group a little bit, it's just not going to be a bigger class. When Hugh Freeze first came in, he was hired the Sunday after the Iron Bowl. I think the news started to leak Saturday of the Iron Bowl. That was when signing day was still in mid to late December. Signing day was like December 20th. So he had weeks to work on those guys. Not only that, he had time to go out and recruit them because that was still when contact and open periods existed in December. Visit periods as well, get those guys back on campus for second official visits. Alex Golesh had a couple days, and this staff had a couple days to make a few phone calls, see what they could do. And overall, Nathan, you talked about it, about as good as you could hope for. Jace Matthews was a loss, no doubt, but you mentioned it. Auburn, and Jason mentioned this on the board yesterday, I think it was, talking about Horatio Fields transferring, which we'll touch on later. Different staffs evaluate guys differently, and how much they value them now goes into that equation. The money part is just part of the equation now. So if you're looking at it from Auburn's perspective, look, I'm not dissing Jace Matthews as a player or as a person. I really like Jace. He's a really good player. But he had ACL surgery 2 to 3 weeks ago at this point recording. If you were going to make a heavy investment in him, he's probably not even going to be playing in year 1. And then he could just hop right in the transfer portal and go to Ole Miss after a season, or go to LSU, or go wherever. He obviously flips to Ole Miss now. And I think his cousin, Dante Moncrief, being on that recruiting staff and potentially being elevated to an on-field role certainly played a part in that as well. And so people were upset when they lost Jace, but I think it just comes down to, where do you want to invest your money? You do not have unlimited money. You've got some cash now. Nathan had a great story talking about how they have built up the NIL to kind of circumvent and go above the salary cap. You've got that cash, but it's not unlimited. So is investing in a receiver, albeit a talented one, who was coming in as a freshman and probably out for the whole season, investing a bunch of that money into him, a smart idea? To me, I don't think it is. Guys will have different opinions on that and whatnot, and everyone can have their different take. You look at some of the other, a loss on signing day of Braylon Womack. You lose him a couple of days beforehand. It's a guy that Auburn obviously wanted to keep. Once DJ Durkin, it was announced that he was retained. Auburn put the gas on him again to try and get him to flip back on signing day. Just wasn't able to quite pull it off. And now that the news came out on Tuesday that TJ Rushing isn't even being retained as the safeties coach, you would have had to wonder if he signed and then decides to hop in the portal in January or something like that, or asks out of his paperwork or something. This class kind of, I label it as, it is what it is. You got some really quality pieces that I like in this class, that Jason likes, that we've seen a good bit. Jaquez Wilkes, Jadarius Tootle, Adam Balagun Ali. There's your linebackers that DJ Durkin held on to. Wilkes being the top rated guy in the class. Signing day was kind of headlined by some familiar faces coming in for the USF staff. Reese Brush there at quarterback, Mikhail Lundy Foster, the offensive lineman. Those two guys were committed to USF, as was tight end DJ Broughton Jr., and then offensive tackle Mason Mathis, who flipped on Friday in the final day of the early signing period. But the real headliner of actually signing day, on Tuesday, you got Deshaun Spencer to flip from Saraland. That's a guy that Jason and I have seen a bunch, saw him in the state title game on Friday. we love that kid. We absolutely love him as a receiver from Saraland. Stock up in a huge way for him. But the headliner of signing day was the defensive lineman. So you look at DJ Durkin, you look at Vontrell King-Williams, a guy that we expect back, not part of that first official release, but I think just working through contract things, working through who's coaching where. Now you get the Coleman Hutzler news as well. So now you have a better idea of who's doing what up front on the defensive line. But you get Tavian Branch in the fold, a guy that Auburn liked a good bit from up there in Pennsylvania. He had one of the weirdest final probably days to a recruitment ever. And it kind of just speaks to what signing day in college football is now. So he was committed to Penn State, reopened his recruitment because James Franklin was fired. His finalists were Penn State, Virginia Tech, where James Franklin went, Ole Miss, which then had a coaching change, and then Auburn, which was going through a coaching change. It was, I mean, the poor kid, like on Tuesday, like good luck trying to figure out where you want to go. And it was on Tuesday night where he was called by Vontrell and told, "Hey, I'm staying. I'm going to be at Auburn. DJ's obviously already been announced as staying. We want you here." And that was kind of what put it over the top to get him in the class. So that was a big win. And then the Wells brothers finally come full circle. We had been expecting them to join the class since the Ball State home opener. It was after that, Chris Wells took his official visit then. Corey tagged along. He had already taken his official visit in June. It was at that point that they, kind of committed behind the scenes. They were planning to flip, and then nothing came out of it. And then they show up again for the Georgia game. Once again, we're like, things are still looking really positive. Things are still looking really good. Felt like Auburn was in a great spot. Still nothing happened publicly. And then they come back for the Iron Bowl, and then finally they announce it on signing day. Chris Wells more of a developmental piece there at the edge, but then Corey, they just don't make a lot of human beings quite like Corey Wells, 6'5", 330, a monster up there as a nose tackle. Really tough to move. And he's a guy who needs a little bit of work, needs a little bit of seasoning, some time in that strength and conditioning program. But once you get him going, we've seen what Vontrell King-Williams can do with those young defensive linemen up front. And they love to rotate guys. They like to get guys in the mix. So he's a guy that has a chance to certainly be an instant impact guy right away. And then I'll touch on as well, trying to fill some time here for Jason to keep working on his story and keep moving along. DeMonte Tabb, late edition there on Friday. The Thompson safety, third straight recruiting class that Auburn has signed a safety from Thompson. You can never really get enough of those guys. Not only safeties, but just guys coming from Thompson. They play in a pretty college-level program. Thompson, Jason, I think, has won 6 of the last 7 state title games in the 7A classification in Alabama. DeMonte Tabb, a guy who was a basketball kid, played receiver for a little bit, and then moved to safety as a junior. Pretty solid as a junior. And then as a senior, listed at 6'2", 180. As a senior, picks off 11 passes. I mean, that's a pretty staggering number to do at 7A. He was a guy that officially visited South Florida the final weekend of the regular season. So this staff was in on him. Cincinnati and West Virginia, some of the other schools that had hosted him for an official visit, but a guy that didn't have a ranking, wasn't really targeted super heavily. We had known about him because we had seen Thompson play, but we weren't really keeping a super close eye on him. And then he gets offered on Friday, signs on Friday, sent him to the rankings guys. They quickly tab him with an 89, which is the highest 3-star that you can get. Number 20 player in Alabama, kind of reminiscent of Caleb Harris, who didn't have a ton of attention his senior year. Auburn kind of shows up towards the end there, says like, look, this is a big physical safety from Thompson who's been really, really productive. We've got space. Let's take a chance. And now, especially with the news that the SEC is jumping up to 105 scholarship spots, makes a lot of sense to take a guy like that. And, I think the ranking of him that our team put out kind of helps back that up. I mean, giving him an 89 and making him the number 20 player in the state of Alabama certainly helps. So all of that wrapping back to say, from what Alex Golesh kind of talked about on Monday, recapping his signing class, look, he knows this is not the standard. It's not the standard that he wants to be recruiting at Auburn. But signing day class of 2026 was always kind of a lost cause, especially, once Hugh Freeze got fired, once the previous staff, it was clear that they weren't still going to be here and there was going to have to be a reset. Because signing day has moved up so much now, it's just kind of a lost cause. You do what you can, you sign who you can there in those couple of days after a hire is made, and then you focus on roster retention and you focus on the transfer portal. And Alex Golesh talks about that during his introductory press conference, saying that roster retention was his top priority. And I think he's been completely honest and right about that. I think they've been working a ton on meeting with the current guys, potentially trimming some spots, focusing on some guys that they really want to bring back and whatnot. And that's kind of where they focus. So signing day, not as eventful as fans have become accustomed to, certainly under Hugh Freeze. But if the proof of concept is there on the field for Alex Golesh and his staff in the upcoming years, I think Auburn will be recruiting at a top 10, top 15 rate pretty consistently.
Yeah, and that word you just used, Christian, is one that we had expected Alex Golesh to circle back to, proof of concept. I wrote about that a little bit. You mentioned the money story. He talked about that several times at USF, so it was not a surprise for him to come in on Monday and say, in not so many words, like, the portal will be more of a focus early on for them, because he wants to put, which I know this is music to Auburn fans' ears, he wants to put as good of a team as possible on the field in year one, which everybody wants to do that. But some people, like Hugh Freeze did, and I'm not saying one's going to get better results than the other, but Hugh Freeze wanted a longer term build right away. And year one, he was during the season talking about, well, we don't have our guys in here yet. I don't think you're going to see that from Alex Golesh, because he's going to bring in as many guys as possible he thinks are going to win in year one. And then it kind of goes back to the thing we always say, which is like Auburn kind of automatically recruits at a top 15, top 10 level if you're like a competent staff. I mean, Gus Malzahn didn't light the world on fire as a recruiter, and he comes to Auburn and just fills out a good staff and does a good job with that. And so you mentioned the portal, though, Christian, as we can kind of go through the news that we've had so far there in terms of guys who have entered the portal. I've pulled up your portal tracker here. I mean, Damari Alston is way back during the season. We knew that was going to happen. By the way, the portal, these guys have not entered the portal. They have just, what was your phrasing?
Their intention.
Their intentions.
That's
whatever.
That's the best way I can phrase it. I talked to Nathan about it on Monday. I was like, I guess I'm just going to headline all of these stories the same, because all they're doing is technically declaring that they intend to enter the portal.
Yeah, I mean, they're technically not even saying that. Yeah, I mean, they're technically saying they're going to enter the portal, but that also doesn't mean these guys are completely out.
Pre-portal and window shopping.
Based on our understanding, you just talked about it a little bit in your previous answer, having those conversations with the coaching staff. As we have come to understand it, especially on offense, it's not so much of, hey, get out. It's, here's where we see your fit. Maybe you won't have as big of a role. And then it's, hey, take that information for what it is. Or more often than not, Christian, I think, and Jason and I have been talking about it early this week, when you're a new staff that comes in here, you're learning about what people's NIL contracts look like. And you're saying, oh, really? When it comes to some of these players. And then if you're Alex Golesh, all you can say is, hey, this is what we can offer you. This is what we feel like you're worth. This is what you've proven so far. Take it or leave it. And you've seen a few different guys put their names forward. I'll run down the list here. Antonio Coleman, the freshman defensive tackle, suspended, didn't play. Not a surprise there. I know he was a promising recruit, but this was something that the writing had been on the wall for a while. Rayon Strader, backup cornerback, on the move again. The big one in terms of former recruit is Perry Thompson. We'll talk about him in just a second. As we understand it, he was one of the highest paid guys on this team. And so I think that was a situation of them kind of looking at that. Production hadn't been super high through 2 seasons. Horatio Fields at wide receiver. This was yesterday. Of course, the Wake Forest transfer who's going to get a medical red shirt. Didn't play much last year, but looked pretty promising. And then Amon Lane Gaines, the redshirt freshman cornerback who is now moving on as well. I don't know what thoughts you have about those guys, Christian. I mean, Perry is the one that sticks out to me. It's former really highly rated recruit, a guy that Auburn wanted to work out, and he had some flashes this year. But it's not surprising that some of these top recruits who signed under Hugh Freeze are going to say, we feel like we're worth a little more than that, and we're going to try to get it going somewhere else.
Yeah, I think the receivers are the ones that have gotten the most reception from fans or the most reaction from the fan base in terms of Perry and Horatio. But you kind of hit the nail on the head there. These are guys that were invested in heavily by the previous staff. The previous staff put a lot of money into that wide receiver room. And that's not to say that Alex Golesh and his staff are just like, oh, we're going to bargain bin the wide receiver room. We're not going to pay for any of those guys. They're clearly going to pay for some guys. They are going to work to keep Cam Coleman. They're going to work to keep Malcolm Simmons, probably Eric Singleton as well, if the money can work out. But you can't make a huge investment in so many guys. And so I think as they were going down the list, a guy like Perry Thompson, who, as you touched on, was more productive as a sophomore, but still wasn't quite to the level of what he was as a recruit. And look, we love Perry, but he's a guy that just didn't quite work out so far at Auburn. His transfer portal grade is in as a 3-star 88, which is solid, but it's not a super, he's not going to finish as a top 10 guy in the transfer portal. He is right now because there's not that many guys in. There's not that many guys that are ranked, but he'll be somewhere in the I'm trying to think back. I think Jackson Arnold was a 90 last year, and he was like the number 120 player in the portal. So if Perry's ranked as an 88, he's in the 150 to 200 range probably.
Yeah, he'll be in the 200s, I think.
Yeah, so somewhere in there. And then Horatio, a guy that we really liked, really sure-handed, big physical receiver, doesn't get a ton of separation, but it doesn't necessarily really matter because of how sure-handed he was. I just don't know if this staff really thought he was a complete fit for this offense, especially at the price point. So he'll move on as well. I haven't seen anything so far that breaks the Auburn roster to me. And even if a huge guy does go in, a guy going out and all that money going out means January 2nd, once the portal opens, you've got money to spend on a guy coming in. So look, this next month of guys pre-portaling and declaring their intention to go, it might be a long month because the only thing that can happen is guys can leave. And so people and fans will probably start to panic a little bit more, but let's just wait and see what happens by the end of January. Once the portal window is closed, by the end of January, you probably will have your entire roster set because now there's no spring portal window. So you'll know who's coming in, have a complete idea of where things are at. I know I'm asking for a lot here, but let's try and be rational. Let's try and let's just see what happens by the end of everything all being wrapped up. And I'm not saying it's going to work out for Auburn. I'm not making some guarantee. I'm just saying right now there's nothing that it is what it is. Guys are going out and you'll bring guys in. That's just the way college football is now.
Yeah, you have to have a mindset shift. If you're and Golesh talked about it yesterday. Look, he said this new transfer portal calendar, this new college football calendar, while chaotic for a lot of programs, especially those that are hiring, firing, that sort of thing. I think about somebody like and I'm not to say that Auburn got a better hire here with Alex Golesh over John Summerall. We're not going to know that for a while, but John Summerall is going to continue to be coaching at Tulane. You've got teams and programs in those sorts of situations where they're not all the way in one way or another. Golesh said he actually likes this calendar right now because now him and his staff, they get a lot of cushion here to evaluate the current roster. Like he's got time here to go through. He talked about watching practice film from some of these guys, like having long individual meetings. He said one meeting took like 6 hours. I mean, he's got time here to evaluate. And then once guys start to make decisions, they can start to evaluate their transfer board. Talking to him on Monday, he already has an idea, which was funny in talking to Jason. I think he was almost trying to get Jason to tell him like, hey, what do you think I should, because you know more than I do, like in terms of transfer board. And
I think we can all answer a lot of those. So
I think so. Yeah. He's like, oh, you guys have been here, but he already has an idea, right? Like he mentioned like, hey, running back is solid at the top. What's behind it? Hey, offensive line was really experienced. Now it's not going to be. Of course, the quarterback, everyone knows. A wide receiver, everybody knows is talented as well. And so, yeah, you mentioned it, Christian. That is his number one priority right now, is having those conversations with current guys on the roster. We understand it, and this is no surprise, that guys like Cam Coleman, are being heavily prioritized with meetings. Guys like Deuce Knight they've already had meetings with him. They're going to continue to have meetings with him. Xavier Atkins, I think, is a guy who's going to be first team All SEC probably in about 28 minutes. When that comes out, he's going to be a big priority for this staff. But yeah, you're right, Christian. It has to be a mindset shift for not just Auburn fans, but a lot of different fans, because you quite literally cannot do anything else except watch a lot of your players say, for one reason or another, I don't want to stick around on this coaching staff. I mean, Golesh said it yesterday. He was like, these guys didn't choose me. Like, sorry, like I can do the best I can. I thought he put it really well when he said, look, I choose them. Like I'm going to do my best for whoever's on this team, but it's just the nature of these things. There's going to be a lot of roster turnover, Jason, on this team. And there's going to be a guy at some point where people are going to go, ooh, that really hurts.
Yeah.
But it's just how this goes. And like we already talked about,
correct. It's going to happen
really hard this year.
Yeah, it's going to happen. And hey, bringing back DJ Durkin doesn't mean that won't happen on defense. I mean, I think they're going to be a defensive guy that somebody goes, man, that's a guy you wish you wouldn't have lost. It's just the nature of the game right now. Is you try to hold on to as many guys as possible, see what you can add from a portal perspective. And I think you are going to have a little bit more room this year. And something I was just kind of thinking about yesterday is, look, this may be an opportunity to take a run at maybe a junior college type player. Those guys have gotten kind of lost in the weeds a little bit, but maybe there's a junior college running back, or maybe there's a junior college defensive tackle where you go, I don't know if that guy's quite ready yet, but maybe he's more ready than a high school guy you're looking at. So you're going, look, how much can this guy help us early? Maybe he can develop and he's still got 2 years to bridge that gap a little bit in between that. And maybe there's a portal guy that you go, kind of like him, but I'm not really sure. Maybe there's a guy that has more upside, but you go, like, he hadn't done it yet, that you can take a run on at a position or two. So I do think it gives you some flexibility with what you're doing.
Well, I just want to bring up that note. I mean, think about a guy that you took like that last year, Xavier Atkins.
Yeah.
He didn't play at all as a freshman at LSU, and that was a guy who DJ Durkin had evaluated Texas A&M and said, look, that is my dude. That is my guy. I believe in him. And Xavier felt the same way, so he went to go play for him. Look how it turned out. And I'm not saying they're obviously not all going to work out like that, but there are guys that get away. There are evaluations that you love that just end up going to another place, especially from, guys coming from USF where they maybe couldn't pull a top guy, or a fringe 4-star guy who decides to go stay wherever, go to Georgia Tech instead of going to Auburn or to USF, excuse me. And so those guys are out there, and it'll be really interesting to see kind of how this portal class fills out.
Let's talk for a minute, Jason. Now that you've published your Coleman Hutzler story, I was looking back here. This actually makes sense. I don't know if you noted it in there. Him and DJ Durkin worked together at Florida on the staff 2 separate times,
and Ole Miss as well.
Ole Miss as well. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense as a guy that they're familiar with. You'll take an Alabama assistant from the Nick Saban era as well on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah,
you look at you going, hey, and I went back and there's a few names. There's a few names that jump out. There's Jonathan Bostic at Florida. I loved and the way he played Alex Anzalone. He was back at Florida again. I didn't have a chance to go through the South Carolina years, but in 2017, he was a finalist for the Broyles Award at South Carolina as a linebacker coach. And then you look at obviously 2 years at Alabama, Will Anderson Jr. and Dallas Walker. Excuse me, not Dallas Walker, but I just went blank on pass rusher.
Will Anderson
with Alabama. Oh goodness, Dallas Turner. So yeah, and you go look, hey, 2 guys who did a pretty dang good job, and so yeah, there'll be people that point to, hey, what Mississippi State did on defense the last couple of years. Listen, he's hired as a position coach, and as a position coach, he's been really, really good. And so I think that's where you look at it. And again, familiarity with what DJ Durkin's doing, that allows you to hit the ground running. You know exactly what that guy expects, what he's looking for in players, all those things. And we talked about, look, you hire guys that you know. That's part of what this business is all about. And so I think you look at DJ Durkin, he's like, I'm going to get a guy that I know what he brings to the table a little bit too. So I think that's you get word, then it gets out. And so it looks like that one is all but done. We'll know maybe Maybe it gets done quicker from an actual contract standpoint than we expect, but it might take a couple of days for it to become official, but it looks like that one's happening for sure.
Speaking of, and we'll run through the staff here, or the guys that we know of. Speaking of bringing guys that you wrote a story yesterday, and Alex Golesh had really interesting things to say about his new offensive coordinator, or Auburn's new offensive coordinator, not his new offensive coordinator, Joel Gordon, who is going to be the primary play caller. He already referenced that in his intro press conference, but he didn't say him by name because it hadn't been set up yet. Also going to handle the quarterbacks, a guy that was obviously, when you look at all those USF offensive numbers under Golesh, Gordon's right there as his coordinator and guy who's helping him call plays. It is and we'll have this conversation more down the road if a guy like Byron Brown ends up hitting the transfer portal. But it is this kind of new age thing you and I were talking about yesterday, Jason, of when you bring over an offensive minded coach, you want him to have all his guys. You're saying, take your operation and move it from point A to point B, and let's see if we can keep it going. Let's see if we can have the same sort of success. And so Joel Gordon brings the continuity there. Tyler Hudenick for the offensive line, real young guy who played at UCF not too long ago, is going to be the offensive line coach. And then Cody Burns, obviously, I think we've talked about him on the show before. After Golesh was hired, is going to be the receivers coach. He's going to be the associate head coach. He's Golesh's right-hand man. So lots of continuity. Still got to figure out running backs, but lots of continuity for Alex Golesh's offense here at Auburn, which is what you come to expect when you hire an offensive-minded coach.
Yeah, no, I think it's really valuable that you're keeping the system in place, and it's not necessarily the system that you're running on the field. It's the system that you're running off the field. That's a really valuable part of this. That, again, we just talked about it. DJ Durkin, you hire somebody you're familiar with because you know exactly how it works, and you know what that's what Auburn's getting right now on offense. You're getting three guys that have been working together to formulate an offensive plan, and then Joel Gordon then calls the plays. And I think as valuable as anything, look at the quarterback development that Joel Gordon has had in his career, going back to Brock Purdy, and then you look at him, in the hooker world with Alex Golesh, and then you look at now, Byron Brown, what he's done there. The combination of those two guys and the quarterbacks and what they've done in this offensive system is really important. And I kind of talked about it today. Alex Golesh has talked about, look, we like to fit our things to what the players do. And I think there's some people that have got that a little bit misconstrued. It's like they're not saying they're changing the offense based on who the quarterback is, but they're saying they tailor the offense to what that quarterback does the best. And that's the thing that you do. You can find a quarterback to run any offense you want it to. Like I could run the triple option. It wouldn't be any good, but I could do it. That's the point now. It's like, look, you can find guys that fit your scheme, but how can you fit your scheme to that guy to make it better? And I think that's the thing that they've done a good job of, and they've done it with different types of quarterbacks. And so I really like this trio and the way it fits. And I think Alex Golesh is a guy that, listen, we've heard for years. You have a coach that says, look, I've got guys I trust, let them go do their jobs. It sure feels like that's what this is. I think, obviously he's involved on the offense, but he's got guys he trusts, and I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, and then on the defensive side of the ball, of course, DJ Durkin was a huge move. We had heard from the very beginning that, the way it was sort of described to me, I wrote about it very shortly after Golesh was hired, but every Auburn coach they interviewed said one of the first questions they asked was, hey, what does your ideal staff look like? That's just, people have to realize how important those things are, because you got to get that ball moving as soon as possible. We saw that because Cody Burns was literally here day one when Golesh got hired. So many of those coaches said DJ Durkin because they just knew what that would mean, not just from a familiarity standpoint, but Golesh talked about it yesterday. Here's a guy who's seen the SEC the last 2 years. Golesh hadn't been here. He's been in the American. He was in the SEC not long ago. But here's a guy who's been game planning for these coaches, these players, the guys in this league. And that's not to mention the familiarity and what you could get from a retention standpoint. But when I asked him about it yesterday, I was like, hey, do you think that's going to help you guys keep some players? He was very clear and said, look, when Durkin was the interim coach, it was not just, and we knew this from talking to guys those last 3 games, it was not just defensive players. Offensive players were really, really jazzed up about it too. He was a guy who made a good impact on a lot of different people. across the roster. And so, we mentioned kind of keeping your guys, Christian. Durkin keeps one of his guys, a guy that in Vontrell King Williams, or at least that has not been official yet, but we believe is going to happen. I mean, we think he's a rising star, and so many people at Auburn think that. You look at recruiting, and that 2025 class, like defensive tackle, was the headliner. You just mentioned what he did in short order here for the 26 class, and then results in the last couple of years. Like, that group has not had a superstar other than Keldrick Falk, and he's kind of been out of that position that Vontrell coaches. He keeps getting really good production out of tons of guys he brings in there. That group was so solid this year. I just think I hesitate to say no brainer because you can hire a lot of good D-line coaches out there, but for what Auburn has done recently and for what people at Auburn believe Vontrell King Williams is and can become, I just think that was a huge hire for them to make.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you touched on it. Look, the production that he's gotten out of the guys in that room has been really, really good. You look at Malik Blockton, really high 3-star coming out of high school, instant impact type guy last year as a freshman, even better as a sophomore, a guy that's towards the top of your list when you talk about roster retention, want to keep him on for next year. You look at the transfers that they've brought in, not necessarily super highly regarded, but he's gotten good production out of them. Dallas Walker this year coming in from Western Kentucky. He wasn't super ranked in the portal. He wasn't coveted by a ton of teams. It wasn't a huge battle, but Auburn evaluated him, really liked him. He was really solid this year. The year beforehand, Philip Bleedy comes in from Indiana. He was a guy that was solid in his role. He's just gotten really good production out of his guys, and they've recruited at a really high level at that spot. And so it's been really impressive to watch for a guy who, when Jeremy Garrett left for the NFL, there was the whole kind of discussion of who's going to be the defensive line coach. Is Vontrell going to get elevated into that position? The players kind of called for it. Players went and kind of met with Hugh Freeze and said, look, this is our guy. We want him to be the guy. And so far it's worked out really, really well, to be honest. And then, from my front, from the recruiting front, the in-state defensive line class in 2027 is loaded. Donovan Moore from Hueytown, really good. Elijah Brown from Prattville, really good. Carlos May from Ramsey, really good. You look at some of the guys that are over nearby in Georgia, Waylon Wooten at Grayson, some of those other guys as well. Mm-hmm. Ton of guys to choose from. Auburn has laid the groundwork with a lot of them. Vontrell has Auburn in a really good spot for a lot of them, and keeping him really helps you. You only signed 2 interior defensive linemen in 2026 just because of how the numbers kind of worked out. Always felt like it would be bigger in 2027. So having that continuity of keeping Vontrell on staff should help you quite a bit there at that position where you always want to keep reloading year after year.
Yeah, guy that you mentioned, the guys he brought in. I'm not so sure Bobby Travis wasn't their most complete defensive tackle this year too. I mean, what he did was really, really impressive. He just wasn't ready to play when he first got here. Like he admitted he was out of shape. Just did not look like an SEC player, did not operate like an SEC player. And so for him to take that jump in year 2, just the defensive front in general, front 7 was obviously like a huge thing for Auburn this year, despite a bad season. And
I think about it too. It's like, because I just mentioned, because somebody said, look, they like the hire of Hutzler. They're like the questions about the youth of the offensive line coach. And I said, well, look, he's got more experience than Vontrell had last year. And that worked out really well. And somebody said, yeah, but I'm not sure he has the horses that Vontrell had to work with last year. And I went, well, Dallas Walker wasn't a horse before last year. Kevis Walker wasn't a horse. Bobby Jameson Travis wasn't a horse before last year. Like who was proven out of that group coming back? That was why it was the biggest question mark on this entire team for most of us going into last year. They worked out pretty darn well. And so I think you got to give a lot of credit to the coaching side of those things. And you can't do it without guys, period. But there wasn't a whole lot of proven commodities on the interior defensive line last year coming into this season.
Well, and to that discussion point, Tyler, I think it's Hudenik.
Yeah,
okay.
Hudenik.
I mean, he has Coach Hoodie. That I'm just going to call him Hoodie the whole time, to be completely honest. So from now on, when I say Hoodie, that's who it is. He's got the chance to have some guys on that offensive line, though, some horses that he could inherit. Connor Luke could be back. Cale Ellis, obviously a young piece who could be back. Xavier Chaplin has another year. He could be back. You look at some of those young guards. DeAndre Carter was a guy who never really got the chance, but you wonder, former highly ranked guy, could he step into a role there? Jacoby Ward, a guy who moved up the depth chart really quickly despite arriving in the summer. Ty Buster, a guy that the last staff
Really
raved about.
I want to see the Tyler Johnson dream come true.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a guy with athletic ability, and you go look. Can you keep him around and see if it's his turn? I mean, like, I agree, Christian. I think there's guys there that have the ability. Now, you're obviously
it's not a complete rebuild of the offensive line.
No, it's nothing compared to what it was 3 years ago.
And you're going to spend in the portal. You're going to spend in the portal for that group.
Yeah,
too.
you're going to go get a couple guys, but yeah, it's nothing compared to what it was 3 years ago. Not even close.
Hopefully, if anybody cringed a little bit when Christian mentioned Xavier Chaplin, I just want to. Jason and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago. The way he played the last 3 games of the season was like night and day. It's kind of hard to quantify. Like, I can't really point to anything, but he was so much better once they went up more up tempo for this offense.
See, that's where I can, because what did we learn about him this year?
He can't hear.
If you're standing at the line of scrimmage waiting to hear a call instead of getting to the line of scrimmage and snapping the football, that's a really difficult thing to do for anybody involved, much less for a guy that has some issues. You got to the line of scrimmage to snap the football these last 3 games, and I thought he was a much different football player in every aspect. And so, again, fit sometimes is not just about a quarterback or a wide receiver. It can be about an offensive lineman too, and that offensive line group looked so much better when they were doing those types of things than they did early in their season. And look, it's also because what we hear Alex Golesh talk about in his press conference to start things. We talked to him just over a week ago. He said, "Well, we'd like to go fast because it limits what the defense could do." He said it. We've been saying that for years. We saw that the last 3 games, and hey, voila, it made a difference for the offense too. And I think that's part of the reason why that's successful.
Yeah, and a guy like Durkin has worked with. I think that's why he's attractive to keep in this role, is he's got a lot of different experience with a lot of different types of offenses, because it does present a different challenge for the defense when you have to. But I think, and this is getting like way off topic, but with the amount of guys Auburn played last year on defense, they were ready for a fast offense. Like, they would have been okay with the Golesh offense because they played a ton of guys on defense. Speaking of defense, I mean, we'll round out here with the other defensive assistant that we know, guy who was here day one as well, DeMarcus Van Dyke. Christian, you were pointing out to me, like, Florida State has a cornerbacks coach opening after Pat Surtain Sr. was let go. Like, they want DeMarcus Van Dyke, or he's somebody that's like up there viewed as a highly rated recruiter in the state of Florida. That's what we've heard about him so far. A guy who played at Miami not long ago, was a 3rd-round draft pick not too long ago. Held a cornerback position role for 1 year at Miami, and then was it FIU, was it FAU? Sounds like he is going to be. I mean, this staff has tons of experience in Florida. Like, they know how to. They were just there, but he is viewed as a highly rated guy there, and so it'll be interesting to see what the defensive back situation looks like with him and needing to bring in another coach.
Yeah, because you had the news about TJ Rushing, not expected to be retained. We do know Crime Dog Wesley McGriff is still around. Not entirely sure what his role will be. He could still be on the field. He could move off the field. We've heard that as a potential possibility as well. He's a guy who I believe was DVD's mentor, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. They've at least known each other and been around each other a good bit. So I think there's a very good chance that he is still at Auburn in some capacity. Crime Dog, that is. DVD kind of not really entirely sure what role he'll be, but he'll be one of those secondary coaches. And then you mentioned recruiting in Florida. I think you'll see a bit of a shift from this staff. Not to say they won't recruit Mississippi, because they will, but the last staff had more ties in Mississippi, so they targeted that as one of their top secondary states compared to the state of Alabama. I think this staff will go back into Florida a little bit more because that's where their connections are. Yeah,
makes sense. Like you said, like, when you have a staff coming from USF, but it just seems like from what we've heard about DeMarcus Van Dyke, he is viewed as a guy who on the defensive side of the ball is really going to help them there. And then the last, I hesitate to say on field, because we were talking to somebody yesterday and it's like, that just doesn't, you have your 10 assistants, quote unquote, but like, you're able to do all sorts of stuff. Jacob Bronowski comes over from Pitt as the special teams coordinator for Auburn. Not going to coach tight ends. like he did at Pitt. 3 return touchdowns for his Pitt special teams over the last 2 seasons. But before that, when he was the special teams coordinator at Miami, Ohio, Jason, they had the number 1 most efficient special teams unit in the country in 2020.
Yeah, I think it was 22, 23, one of those. Yeah, I guess 4 seasons he's had the top 10 efficiency special teams 2 out of the 4 years he's been a special teams coordinator. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, pretty solid. So of course that means Chad Lunsford is not getting retained. He has already been, according to Brandon Marcello, he has already been hired at Arkansas.
Yes.
Which we learned a very funny story about Chad Lunsford when the hire of Alex Golesh went down.
Yes. So if you guys remember the video of Alex Golesh, or if you guys have seen it since he's been hired with Tom Herman and that whole saga of them getting, I'm saying this to our listeners, by the way, I know both of y'all know this. They met at midfield and Golesh just kind of brushed him off. That was because a year prior, as Chad Lunsford explained to us, because Chad Lunsford was the special teams coordinator at FAU under Tom Herman, they kicked an onside kick late in that game. They were up
25.
by like 20 or 30, and they kicked an onside kick in the 4th quarter. And Chad tells us there was some talk on the headsets, like, are we sure we want to do this, coach? Is like that's interesting. Well, they decided to do it. Next year, Golesh's USF team goes to Boca Raton and beats the snot out of FAU. And so when Golesh has the opportunity to see Tom Herman again, to be fair, he did shake his hand, but it was a very quick.
It was a flyby. Yes,
it was a drive-by handshaking. And then the funniest part to me is that as Tom Herman is still harassing him in his ear, all Golesh is doing is going to FAU players. And he's like, good game, guys. Good game.
Yeah.
Like just pretending like he's not even there. So there's a little bit of backstory there.
But Chad, look, he lands in the SEC. So good for him. Good spot for him.
Absolutely. Oh, and great dude. Great dude.
Yes.
Love Chad.
There was the other defensive assistant who got announced in the press release as well yesterday, correct?
Yes. Brad Wilson is former Indiana State, the Sycamores defensive coordinator. He was an FCS defensive coordinator for 6 years. Before that, he was a Division II defensive coordinator at Wayne State. He came over at USF last year and was basically doing this same thing, by the way, he's about to do. So he was at USF as a defensive assistant, not one of the 10 guys, but he was working with linebackers. And now, as everybody knows, you can coach. Those guys can coach on the field. Doesn't matter anymore. Todd Orlando, USF's defensive coordinator, was the same thing Durkin is. It's DC linebackers. Well, DC's got a lot going on. You want a really high-level linebacker assistant coach. That's what he's going to be at Auburn as well. So Brad Wilson, they put him out in the release as just defensive assistant. Yeah. He's basically going to be, as we understand it, we'll see what they say, but as we understand it, he's going to be kind of like Durkin's right-hand man to coach the linebackers.
Yeah, linebacker coach there. And I think, listen, we also know Harding Harper is on staff now as kind of the head of the scouting department and over kind of all those areas, a former Carver Montgomery linebacker who played at Vanderbilt and did some things. And the guy
if you go to his 247 profile, if you go to his recruiting profile, I can tell you the man who took the picture.
Yeah, that's how long I've been doing this job. But so the guys, I took his profile photo a long time ago. He played actually with Jeremy Johnson, Jeremy's junior year at Carver Montgomery. So he obviously is familiar with the area. He'll have a lot of contacts in this area, which will be really good. And then I think, look, there's going to be a new strength staff. I think there's going to be some new additions in training, medical side of things too. I mean, there's going to be some new faces in a lot of areas that haven't had new faces in quite a while at Auburn. So we'll learn a lot more of those over the next couple of days.
Yeah, GM Andrew Warsaw, Director of Scouting Alex Fagan coming over from USF. We don't know what their direct titles are going to be at Auburn outside of Warsaw.
Yeah.
But a ton of those personnel folks are coming over.
Yeah, I was going to kind of give you some runway a little bit there, Jason. Talk about Warsaw. He was the guy you wrote about yesterday. Talk about right-hand people for Golesh. He's absolutely going to be that.
Yeah, he has done it at a lot of places. Obviously, was at Tennessee, was at Mississippi State before that. But, has been at South Florida, worked in the NFL as head of game operations. So this is a guy that has done these things. The last 3 or 4 years at South Florida was over kind of the NIL for everybody. I mean, South Florida is very different. It's funny. You mentioned another one of those stories. We laughed because we heard, one of the guys from South Florida got here and immediately started writing. This is somebody on the staff immediately started writing out bios for signees on signing day. And they were, look, you don't have to do that. Not here. You don't have to do those things at Auburn. Those are things you have to do at places like South Florida. Is like they had to write their own bios for the recruits. But yeah, Andrew Warsaw was he was NIL for the entire athletic department. Now he's going to be chief of staff and GM and doing a lot of those go between things. I think you look at those two guys will be really heavily involved in the contract side of things as you look to figure out how this thing works. And obviously you still got in-house folks that'll be able to help with third-party deals, some of those things too. But this will be the revenue sharing part of it, your budget, how much you're spending on guys. That's the big part of the brain trust to figure out how much goes to certain players, how much you want at certain positions, all those things. They'll have their own ideas about that.
Yeah, and Christian referenced it earlier. We reported last week that Auburn is attempting or has a plan in place to have a roster that's between 25 and 30 million, closer to 30 million. It's funny, in like the 48 hours after I put out that story, you saw that number pop up at a bunch of different places. I saw it that day at Penn State, put out as soon as Matt Campbell was hired, like, hey, they're going to give Matt Campbell around $30 million. Go read it if you haven't. But I mean, basically, like you said, Jason, you need all these people to kind of have a brain trust because you have to be creative with NIL to be able to go above the revenue sharing cap. How are you going to distribute those things? Golesh mentioned it yesterday. He said in his conversations with people at Auburn, like the innovative way you're going about it. That's what you got to do nowadays. You got to find every rule that you can. You got to make sure you're maximizing your roster resources. And of course, Auburn wants to give Alex Golesh everything he can possibly have in order to succeed. And so in the next few days, next week or so, it's going to be more of what we've been talking about here. It's going to be portal declarations, intentions, whatever we want to call it. It's going to be coaching staff. So those are going to be the main things. We will continue to learn more about Alex Golesh's vision. And then January 2nd will be floodgates will be open. We'll start to figure out Auburn's transfer board, and they're going to be off and running. And like Christian mentioned, it's going to be really awesome to know what the roster looks like before spring and knowing largely it's all going to stay together. At least, I mean, I would think, right? Unless
not largely. I mean, there's no other chance for a guy to leave unless they want to quit playing football.
I didn't know how many, what other extenuating circumstances there are.
I guess you could try and do what the Wisconsin kid did, Xavier Lucas, who went to Miami, who just unenrolled from a school and enrolled at another one, I guess. But for 99% of the we'll know what it'll look like pretty much by the end of January.
Well, that helps. Maybe a little bit of a return to how things used to be, where we actually could know off the top of our head everybody on the roster in early on in the year. So I think we're going to call it there, guys, if that's okay with y'all. Appreciate AU Club, as always, for sponsoring. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and kind of listening to this catch-all episode. We'll be back with you guys as soon as we see fit for another episode, maybe talk some basketball as they're getting close to the end of non-conference play and anything else that comes up for Alex Golesh and his new Auburn staff. So for Jason Caldwell and Christian Clemente, I'm Nathan King. Thank you guys so much for listening in today, and we'll talk to y'all later.